Thank you. I'm so glad you're here, Paul, because as a fellow Brit, I want your opinion in the chat afterwards, what you make of what I'm going to say. I'm so glad you're here. Anyway, what I've been thinking about, pondering over for a little while now, is the fact that as you get older, you look back and you see the cultural changes that have happened during your lifetime. I was reading a book about Victorian Britain and the difference between people's expectations of the culture at the beginning and the end were quite dramatic. Well, Elizabethan Britain has been going on even longer than Victorian Britain did. And since I was about 4 or 5, when she came to the throne, it's basically my life. So I was pondering on that. I'm going to be reading some of this just to remind me what I was going to say. But what I did was I thought specifically about rites of passage, the personal things that happen. And I decided to focus on 2 major ones, weddings and funerals, and how they seem to have changed. Now, I do acknowledge that part of this might be coming from one culture to another, and part of it is my age. So that's why I'm so glad I can get some feedback from Paul. Okay, where did I start? I remember being a bridesmaid as a child. I remember the wedding guests being at least half family and probably more than that, and adult relations and family friends. I remember funerals being very family oriented, very sad, gloomy occasions with a graveyard component, followed by rather nasty food being served in a drafty hall. You can see I was in England. Both were primarily times when the family was coming to terms with the loss, and it helped the adjustment. In the last few years, a few friends' children and my niece got married, and sadly, I am attending an accelerating list of death events. I will start with the weddings. These are all in England, because I haven't been near a wedding in America in many years. Weddings were a time for the 2 families to meet and meld, and a whole realignment within the group. Nowadays, it seems the couple decide to get married after several years of living together, often because they realize how complicated it will be legally with the children when one of them dies or needs help or they split up. They arrange the wedding themselves with very little parental support, either financially or any other way. And basically, it's just a big party for all their friends. I got a grudging invitation to my niece's wedding. My son was not included, neither was her brother's girlfriend, or even, until there was a major fight, her father's new wife. The family table had 8 people on it. The other 75 guests were friends. They had all the trappings of a traditional wedding, in terms of bridesmaids' dresses, cakes, toasts, a big meal followed by a party, and lots of presents. The friends partied all night while people like me went back and stayed in the room. The ceremony was decidedly secular, but obviously legal. Friends in England tell me that is very typical at this point, and my peer group is not quite sure why the children even bother. As another cultural twist, marriage was out of fashion for many years, and most of my friends there never got married, children or not, or they get married when they're about to retire to get the retirement benefits. And they're a little confused and surprised by their children. Very interesting change 2 ways in my lifetime. I've also recently been pondering death rituals. A friend of mine is sitting by her 101-year-old father's bedside, probably as we speak, waiting for him to die, as he has been in hospice now for 3 weeks. Was expected to die during the first 3 days. And I think that's what cemented my mind thinking more about this. The death rituals in America because I've been here basically. As a rite of passage, funerals were a realignment of those left behind. Inheritance was often tied up with attending the funeral. They certainly are a chance to mourn the dead and to celebrate the life of the dead person, but they are primarily for the living. Traditionally, the family would change after a death. However, this too seems to have altered. Distance makes many families in this country so far apart, so only those who can easily get there go to the funeral. When my husband died, a religious funeral was out of the question. He was quite convinced that religion causes all the evil in the world and could always find wars and prejudices to make his cause. Thus, the memorial of choice was a celebration of life. I tried to invite everybody significant in his life at the end, and some of his family did come into LA for it. We had a meal in his favorite restaurant, had booked enough space and time for that section for people to participate. We had testimonials, pictures, jokes. The feedback afterwards was extremely positive, as people felt they had learned things about him that they hadn't known, and were able to celebrate his life without getting too sad about his passing. There was nothing spiritual about it at all. However, we have not yet scattered his ashes, which will happen with family this summer, COVID permitting. A beautiful celebration of life I went to a few years ago was in a garden up in the hills behind Santa Barbara. The setting was perfect, as was the climate. We all stood in a circle, held hands, and then in turn, people went to the middle of the circle as the mood took them and spoke about the person who had died or played music for him. This did have a spiritual feel to it. Again, there were no family members there, although some do live fairly close. Then I have to mention the two friends who had both been in long-term relationships, by which I mean over 10 years, with their partners. They had good communication with the partners' families and felt totally part of them. But in both cases, family members swooped in from the East Coast, transported the body back, and the deceased is now in the family graveyard. Neither of my friends even attended the service. Witnessing that led me to feel that the end of life is an important time to be married to your partner. In both cases, I don't know if this is significant or not, the families were Jewish. Then there are the traditional ceremonies. I recently attended prayer sessions for deceased people in a Thai Buddhist temple and a Sikh Gurdwara. The Thai one was almost entirely people who were not Buddhist. I think maybe 4 Buddhists in the entire congregation. It was in a rather gaudy campus at the north end of Coldwater Canyon. One end of the room had statues of Buddha, mostly in gold, and in front of us was a stage. 4 monks came out, chanted in Sanskrit, played some music. One of them stopped from time to time to explain to us what was going on in very strongly accented English, which was rather hard to understand. He then gave a sermon, the gist of which was that as a Buddhist, he would be reincarnated and meditation is extremely important, none of which I would disagree with. The bereaved parents had to light some incense stick, and there was a part of the ceremony when they were in front of the monks, something we couldn't understand. When it was over, we had some food to take home. It was a lovely service. I couldn't understand it, but it had a beautiful feel to it. But it was more like an anthropological observation in some ways than a service. The Sikh one was in North Hollywood. The temple is in a shabby looking building in a very rough part of town, which is very easy to miss. Inside, there are 2 religious sanctuaries and a big room where people eat and drink. The service of prayers, this one was in Punjabi, and mostly singing and praying and playing music, which was very beautiful. Enough Sikhs were present with the responses to have a strong, moving spiritual feeling to it, although I do not understand Punjabi. On a non-COVID time, the service would have been at a mortuary, and I have been to one of these as well. And everybody stands outside because there's kind of very thick glass around the cremation and watches the flames go up, which again was a very moving experience when I experienced it. I've included those 2 examples, not to contradict myself, but to show the traditional way of mourning is still around in some communities, but certainly not among the circles that I normally move in. Thank you.